The Great Lakes Basin contains the largest freshwater dune complex in the world. About 275,000 acres of sand dune formations are located in Michigan alone. And here on our side of Lake Michigan, we had all of the right ingredients for whipping up a dune, especially the large perch dunes that we're used to seeing up here in northwest Michigan. For thousands of years, receding glaciers moved massive amounts of gravel and till, leaving a lot of flat spots along the lake shore where they retreated, and also very tall areas of moraine where sand could accumulate. We had prevailing westerly winds, and we also had lots of wave action, so there were quite powerful means of transporting and depositing. The last glacier receded around 14,000 years ago, and this is what a lot of our area may have looked like at the time. The geology of our landscape here in Michigan and our coastal dunes all started with the glaciers. And not just that, coastal dunes are unique in that they don't form just anywhere or under any conditions. They need three specific things to form: a source of dry sand, a means to sort and transport the sand, and a land area on which to deposit the sand. Dunes are constantly growing and changing. Wind coming off of Lake Michigan is always moving sand to different places, and with the freezing and thawing of winter and the continual sand being piled higher and higher, sandslides can occur, which changes the dune significantly among other geological and physical factors. So, coastal dunes are always shifting. The greatest concentration of open dunes occurs along the northwest shorelines of Lake Michigan, with the largest dunes scattered along the western shoreline due to the prevailing westerly winds. There are a lot of interesting landscapes and features associated with coastal dunes, and we'll focus a lot of this presentation on open dunes. Open dunes are biologically distinct geological features associated with the Great Lakes and other large inland lakes, as well as the shorelines of many oceans and seas. Those along the Great Lakes are distinguished from other coastal dunes by distinctive Great Lakes flora and fauna, although it is important to note that some plant species are shared with dunes of the Pacific Northwest. All dunes have distinctive zones determined largely by the physical processes of dune formation: transport of sand along the shore by waves and current, followed by wind transport of sand to create dunes. The beach is the most dynamic zone, where wind, waves, and coastal currents create an ever-changing environment. These dune successions and their habitats help support some very unique species. Dune vegetation is adapted to constant sand burial and abrasion. As plants are buried by sand, they continue to form new growth above the sand while their roots and rhizomes continue to grow and stabilize the sand. As vegetation of the dunes is stabilized, herb and shrub diversity increases, and there is a gradual accumulation of organic soils and eventual transition to forest. Coastal dunes have both ecological and economic benefits. Most importantly, coastal dunes play a critical role in buffering our shorelines as well as hosting a variety of unique ecosystems and species. Coastal dunes fall under a variety of land uses, ownerships, and management easements, including local, county, and state parks, national lakeshores, which are comparable to national parks, private land serving as commercial and residential use, and land conservancies. The dunes have long provided a variety of economic uses, and their beauty and rich diversity of plant and wildlife attract both residents and millions of visitors to Michigan shorelines to visit, live, and work. As Michiganders, we're quite accustomed to seeing sand dunes in our landscape, especially those of us on the western side of Michigan. For most of the world, coastal dunes are quite a rarity and one of the main reasons for the importance of dune conservation. The Michigan Natural Features Inventory, or otherwise known as MNFI, has a calculated system of ranking the rarity of habitats at both the state and global scales. Open dune ecosystems have a state rank of S3, which rates them as vulnerable. At the global level, they are also considered vulnerable. Like I mentioned, coastal dune areas support a diversity of plants and wildlife. The beach is the most dynamic zone where wind, waves, and coastal currents create an ever-changing environment. Scattered plants of sea rocket are often found growing near the water's edge. Farther up the beach, primary dune plants like marram grass, beach pea, and sand cherry are particularly important to the health of the Great Lakes dunes, as they help to anchor blowing sands. Eventually, the grasses, herbs, and shrubs stabilize the sand enough that the larger back dunes form behind the foredune, and back dunes are often forested. On your tables, you will find a complete list of herbaceous species to be found on our open dunes, including all of the tree species you can find growing within these habitats. Other wildlife to be discovered are sandpipers, herons, and many species of dragonflies and damselflies. They also host Fowler's toad, eastern hognose snake, wolf spiders, and antlions. One of the most interesting ecosystems one can find within our coastal dunes landscape are interdunal wetlands. Interdunal wetlands host a vast array of grasses, sedges, and rushes. They also host an interesting wildflower, the common boneset, a plant which has a long history with herbalists. The stem grows through the leaves, and it was thought that this was a sign that it would help in healing bones. Boneset has tiny, fragrant white flowers in fuzzy clusters that are popular with native pollinators and butterflies. The dark green pairs of leaves curl from the stems, and boneset blooms in late summer to early fall for about 1 to 2 months. It easily forms colonies if planted in sun to part sun and wet to moist conditions. The root system produces many rhizomes and can withstand flooded areas for short periods. For garden club members, if you were to consider planting this native species, aim for back areas or rain gardens. Considering that coastal dunes are such a unique land formation, as you might expect, they also support a unique ecological network as well, and are home to many rare species of plants and animals. Located in the upland zones of the dune, you may find pitcher's thistle, which is both state and federally listed as a threatened species. Pitcher's thistle is a threatened species, meaning it is likely to become endangered in the future, and endangered refers to a species being dangerously close to extinction. This native Michigan plant grows on the shores of our Great Lakes and is typically a white or silvery color, with the exception of its creamy pink flowers that bloom sometime after the plant reaches its 5th birthday. This blossom is the only time the thistle releases its seed, which is then pollinated by insects, mostly bees. Piping plovers can also be found there, which are listed as endangered on both a state and federal level. As far as our interdunal wetlands, you can find the Blandings turtle, which is listed on the State of Michigan's Special Concern Register. Shoreline dunes are not only one of Michigan's most spectacular natural features, but they are also one of its most fragile. Just like many other areas in Michigan that support our natural resources, our coastal dunes are also highly threatened by development. Overuse, misuse, and unwise developmental pressures are increasing as more and more people seek the unparalleled scenery that the dunes provide. Shoreline real estate is some of the most coveted in the nation, and the beauty that Michigan shorelines offer are no exception. In addition to being popular sites for home building, they are also hotspots for off-road vehicles and other intensive recreational uses, as well as sand mining and other commercial activities. Such activities, when allowed to continue in uncontrolled and improper ways, will result in dune destruction. Climate change is also a major threat to Michigan's dunes. At least one feature of a changing climate is already affecting the Lake Michigan shoreline. Scientists and whistleblowers have been saying for years, a warmer atmosphere means more intense storms, and more intense storms mean large waves, and that means more damage to structures along the shore. This makes it imperative that people understand and appreciate the environmental sensitivity of sand dunes. Of course, we cannot mention threats to our dunes without highlighting one of the most detrimental causes of concern. Invasive species are plants or animals that are not native to an area and can be introduced by different means. People often use exotic plants in their landscaping, not realizing the potential harm they can do. Additionally, plant seeds can travel from place to place through people, animals, or the wind. Seeds will catch onto clothing or fur and move from one location to another. Birds can also drop seeds that were picked up elsewhere. These are all ways that invasive plants can establish themselves in habitats in which they do not belong. Invasive plants can cause harm to the dune environment by crowding out or damaging native plants that are critical for dune stabilization and succession. When this happens, the exotic species then transition into the category of invasive species. There are a handful of invasive plant species that have invaded many of our preserves, and although volunteers regularly work to remove them, it is a constant battle. Here are a few examples of the exotic species that have become invasive. Most of them you've probably heard of. Of course, there are many more that this list doesn't cover, but here are a few. For the upland zones, we've got baby's breath, black locust, spotted knapweed, and the blue limegrass from our previous slide. That one's particularly alarming because it resembles American beachgrass, which is a native dune species, making it difficult to detect. For our interdunal wetlands, problematic invaders include the exotic species of Phragmites and reed canary grass. As we consider the threats to the sensitive balances of these beautiful ecosystems, you may wonder, in what way are coastal dunes protected? Past concerns over the destruction of these unique natural resources led to the passage of Michigan's Sand Dune Protection and Management Act in 1976. In 1989, Governor James Blanchard signed an amendment to the Michigan Sand Dune Protection Act. It established protective standards to critical dunes. The amendment has profoundly influenced the way in which homes are constructed in the dunes, controlling the design and the construction process, the manner in which they are accessed, and their impact to the surrounding area. Since this enactment, the law has played a significant role in preserving natural dune areas and stopping abuse. Unfortunately, in 2012, a lot of the legislation loosened up some of the established restrictions, making it easier for property owners to build on critical dunes, but many safeguards are still in place. There were also additional protection acts and amendments that have taken place since then that cover coastal dunes. Here is a short list of the most important laws currently in place that are pertinent to dune ecosystems. The major ones being Part 91, Part 301, and Part 353 at the state level. At the federal level, some noteworthy advancements include major environmental acts such as the Clean Water Act of 1972 and the Endangered Species Act of 1973. Michigan's dune systems have been here for thousands of years, but like most critical or endangered habitat, that does not necessarily mean that they will last through the next millennium or even the century without our help. It is worth emphasizing within this presentation the strategies that can be employed to help preserve healthy dunes, as well as enhance the dune areas that could use some attention. It is also always helpful to clarify what the act of preserving an ecosystem looks like. When preservation is defined as the practice of leaving it alone and not involving human influence, this method typically only applies if the ecosystem is already functioning well on its own. Actions that we can take to help preserve healthy dunes include following the regulations that we discussed previously, minimizing activities that can cause abnormal erosion or disrupt sensitive habitats, and monitor for changes such as abnormal fluctuations in water levels due to climate change or encroachment by non-native invasive species. For dunes that may need some help, there are restoration activities that would benefit the preservation of ecosystem function immensely. Some examples of this would be planting American beachgrass for erosion stabilization where feasible, planting other native vegetation that was likely historically present but is now absent or rare, and carefully controlling non-native invasive species while minimizing the impact to sensitive native plants. It is also very important to note that dunes like these have always eroded and always will. It is important to differentiate between natural erosion and accelerated erosion. Ironically, one way erosion can actually become accelerated is from the installation of structures meant to protect shoreline homes from erosion, such as seawalls. Hard shoreline barriers interrupt the Great Lakes' natural processes in a way that worsens erosion over time. Seawalls and riprap certainly provide short-term relief, but structurally are ultimately doomed to fail and actually alter natural systems in a way that can worsen erosion, sometimes even creating conditions that pull sand so far out into the lake that it can never wash ashore again. Thank you so much for your interest in the topic of Michigan dune ecosystem, ecology, and management. A special thanks to the Spirit of the Woods Garden Club for hosting this presentation, and to my Manistee Conservation District coworker Josh Shields, who's a great resource for information on native habitat conservation. For more information on native and invasive species to be found on Lake Michigan's open dunes, check out the Michigan Natural Features Inventory website for a comprehensive list.